You're over at Subscribestar, the various other links. I got a mailbox if you want to send me comics, Comics Geek type of comics to look at, or really whatever you want to send me is fine. So Hollywood is set to ruin the Chronicles of Narnia with a feminist, non-Christian interpretation. How do I know all this, you might ask? Well, because what else are these lizards going to do? You think they're going to, just for it's a Christian story. C.S. Lewis and Tolkien at the same time were writing, or roughly the same time, were writing these kind of loose Christian stories. Tolkien's was much looser, but then somebody points out all the Christian themes, like, oh, I did not get that. The stuff about the limbus and the bread of God, I did not get the body of Christ type stuff. I didn't get that the first time I read it, but great stories, both of them, but they do have religious theme work. So you think for a minute that Holly, but the thing is, the Lion, the Witch, and the Chronicles of Narnia is way more Christian. It's also, more obvious themes. It's also for a younger audience. But do you think Hollywood is going to tell a Christian story in any capacity? There's no way for them to do this. I mean, you could, as soon as you see the headline for the story, like Hollywood's going to tell a story. Well, first assumption is it's woke, and then you go, oh, it's some kind of like Christian. Some kind of Christian background, themed story. It's like, oh, well, that's impossible for Hollywood to do because they're lizards. They're not going to do that. I think like Tolkien, they made the movie about his life and his Christianity was an important part of his life. So that's the aspect we're not going to tell about his life. It's like, yeah, there's no way for Hollywood to tell these kind of stories. They hate Christians. Are you out of your friggin' mind? They hate Christians with a genocidal passion. So no, they cannot tell a Christian story because it would actually kill them. And I'm not speaking hyperbolically there. They would spontaneously combust because they have a core of demon seed inside them. So Barbie director Greta Gerwig to direct 2 films for at least it's a Netflix, which is going to be a lower, but like, by all means, please spend it. Please budget this. Please make a big budget Netflix bomb. I don't think they're going to spend a whole lot of money on this because even at this point they have to be looking at Wheel of Time. I think that's Amazon. Like, what happened to Wheel of Time? It's some Amazon show. I just I don't know. It's out there, I guess. Did anyone watch it? No, not so much. What about Rings of Power? Oh, that audience fell off a cliff. So what about like I think there's 5 or 6 Star Wars streaming shows. What about all those? The audience just isn't there for it. It's like, where's the audience? Well, the audience is on YouTube and BitChute and Twitter and all these other Odyssey and, Gab and all this other kind of stuff. Like, the audience is not in mainstream Hollywood. Anyway, so good luck with the Netflix streaming thing. So it's like based on the Chronicles of Narnia. It's like, yeah, you can say that, but it's going to be more accurate to say loosely inspired by Narnia, and that's it. You don't need to know anything else about this. It's going to suck. I was driving this morning and I saw this story before I went out, and I got this long drive and I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking like, yeah, all these pop culture YouTube channels, what happens when everything out of Hollywood just sucks? All the the movie blogs and the neurotic type of stuff. Sometimes the channels will talk about some shows, but I feel like they're being overly nice to them just because they don't want to say that everything sucks, because you're in this kind of weird position. It's like, well, it's kind of it's like, gee, maybe Hollywood should not make things that don't suck. And then you'd have to kind of go down the rabbit hole and go like, but why is Hollywood making these shows with a certain theme, you might say? Well, that's, not a discussion to be had on YouTube. The thing is, when shows are kind of nice to things like, oh, this show wasn't that bad, you're settling for crap when those shows say that. That just because it's not as crap as the other crap, that's all the crap before it, you don't have to settle for shows like, oh, it wasn't that bad. I was like, but was it good? I mean, you're paying with your time, or you're paying with money. Somehow it's like it's got your attention when you could just be reading a book or something. You could be doing anything else. Like, just because it's not bad, that's not a reason to watch it. And I look at everything that comes out now, and like, that's where it is. It's just, oh, some things aren't as bad as the other things. Yeah, but like, you look at it and go like, would you rewatch this movie? And there's a ton of movies now. That's the test, is rewatchability. And there's a ton of movies now. The answer is a hard no. I do a movie review and I try to rewatch it like immediately after it concludes and go, oh, I'll rewatch it to pick up the things I didn't see. And then I get like 10 minutes into it, realize, oh, I just don't want to. I just turn it off. I just can't watch it. It's painful. It's just boring to watch because And that's everything that's come out, almost everything that's come out in the past 5 years. But what happens when more and more of the stuff is like that, where you get halfway through it and you're like, if I wasn't doing a review on this, I would have dipped out. That was a Dial of Destiny. I got 15 minutes into that. If I wasn't going to talk about it and do a couple of videos on it, like I would have dipped out after 15 minutes. That's how bad it was. So yeah, de-aged the guy, but you didn't de-age his voice, and he sounds like an 80-year-old guy. I mean, it's okay. I don't know how that. It's a $300 million movie, and that slipped your mind. Is it? You couldn't. Thing is, honestly, you would have been able to take. Do an audio analysis of so many of his earlier movies when he was under 50 and had his younger voice, and I think you could pull all that audio and have it be, have the computer come up with a fake voice for him based on so much earlier content. And they didn't want to do that, so they used his 80-year-old voice, which sounded like an 80-year-old. I mean, it was so friggin'. Oh, hey, the Germans are bad again. Gee, I can't help but think this theme is almost pathological. I think you just hate blonde people. It's not so much the World War II stuff. Anyway, so these shows, these mindless entertainment that you pay for directly or via advertising, a show isn't good just because it's not bad. At some point, you're just going to tune out all of Hollywood because it just sucks at sweaty donkey balls so hard. Lizard people cannot hide their inner snake. Anyway, so I guess people like to hear about how bad these woke shows are. I think people spend more time watching YouTube videos about these crap movies than they watch the films themselves. I was that way with Mahler's videos in Star Wars, where those were like his 4-hour deconstruction of Star Wars were just amazing. And then you look at the regular Star Wars, like, yeah, I saw some of it, and it's like after that, it's just not worth watching. So even the stuff that people sort of like is still a woke, nerfed version, but people are just so beaten down and cucked that they accept it. You don't have to accept any of this kind of stuff. Like Batman and Spider-Man came out 1 or 2 years ago. There's just not that many hits coming out of Hollywood anymore. Those movies both did well. I think they got $700-800 million, which isn't. That's not phenomenal for nowadays. For big name recognition films, those could have easily hit $1 billion, and they probably should have. And then you're like, yeah, $700-800 million is good. It's a solid hit. You profited. You get net profit over $100 million. But it's like, why didn't it hit $1 billion? And then you look at the movies, you're like, well, let's take a close look. They race swapped almost all the characters, and people just kind of accepted that. If you pay for something, you're going to get more of it. They slowly boil this water to where people think a movie isn't woke just because they didn't race swap the lead character, but they swapped out every single other character. You just don't have to settle for that. At least you don't have to pay for it. Anyway, so they're doing the Chronicles, a Christian allegory. People said that about Lord of the Rings, which it was, but that was much looser. Narnia is much more of a simple Christian tale. It's a great kids story, where Lord of the Rings is a story that I think The Hobbit was made for kids more, though it was a great story for all ages. Lord of the Rings was kind of an all ages story. I mean, that's something I can go back and reread every few years. Where Narnia, like I read it a couple times as a kid, and that's about it. So the lion is obviously God in some iteration. The witch is the adversary, and they balance the story by teaching the kids lessons about false prophets and sticking to the core dogma and not losing your way. I mean, there were some cool science fiction elements within this story as well as the religious elements. So there's no way to make this today. Not at Netflix, not in this current version of Hollywood, not with this director. You're asking the impossible. They would make it woke. They're going to make it woke, and it will bomb. First, they have to, of course, diversify it. They have no choice there, and they lose half the audience. Hey, we're doing Narnia, but it's going to be a bunch of Mary Sues and purse puppies. Oh, that sucks. Why are you doing that? Oh, you're istophobe? Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's the only logical conclusion. The whole audience is istophobic. Everyone who didn't watch the show is istophobic. Why don't you just be curative and honor the artist's original vision? Oh, because they're all a bunch of Hugo Boss. So you're like, do you hear yourself? The original story that you're borrowing, you're inspired. Why don't you just write your own effing story? And start it off with, if you don't want to put white characters in it, just start it off that way. Write something original. Because we're lizard people, we can't create. Evil can't create. That's legitimately the way it is. So what will happen is the audience is going to dip out, and they'll just call they'll get on Twitter, and the actors will get on there, and they'll virtue signal, like, who was that Star Wars guy who was virtue signaling for the Boba Fett show or the Obi-Wan show or something where people didn't like the girl who was co-starring in the show for some reason. I don't know. I never saw it. And he's in his car doing a little car video and virtue signaling. It's like, yeah, you idiot. That's not going to get people in the. That's exactly the wrong approach. Hey, I'm glad you're lecturing me from your $220,000 AMG in your gated community. Oh, please tell me how I should feel, Mister. I'm worth $50 million. But they do it. Like, they really imagine all the people that they were singing that during the Wu Flu from their gated communities in their mansions. We're all in this together. Well, we're not. I mean, not exactly, because you guys are in La La Land. But that's the lack of self-awareness for a lot of these people. Anyway, so they'll call the people who aren't watching the show Islamophobic. I mean, it's been done to death. I think both sides are getting tired of this kind of stuff, but they're not going to stop. They're just going to keep producing this crap and keep calling you phobic for not watching crap. People are not outraged. They don't need to touch grass. They just don't watch this stuff. Oh, what was he say about She-Hulk? We outraged the chuds. I mean, they watched probably the first episode and then they stopped watching because, everyone stopped watching. That's why it only went one season. Yeah, we sure own them. The idea is to make it so popular that people demand it keeps going. It's like you keep making season after season that like you're doing business here. You understand you're selling a product. And if we own the chuds, are you just effing developmentally disabled? And they just continue to effing fail upwards. Honestly, this stuff is just really hard to take. So people are not outraged. They just don't watch this stuff. They just don't care if the pedos in Hollywood call them Islamophobic. They call everyone that. It's like everyone who disagrees with me is the Austrian corporal. It's like the time of the witch trials. And it's weird how that isn't taught in schools. Oh, because the blue-haired teachers are the literal Bolsheviks that are trying to repeat history. And they actually are very successful at repeating history, so stock up on everything you need. Of course, they're not going to teach about the witch trials and the importance of due process. Believe women, believe victims. What about due process? Oh, the Nazis had due process. Really? Sounds based. Or teach kids how to think and not what to think. That all ended about 20 years ago, because then it's conceivable that the kids would reach a different conclusion. What if boys aren't girls? What if all that's horse pucky? What if racism is just a control term used by globalists to manipulate the sheep NPCs? What if all these kids today have been brainwashed by government, schools, and mass media? What if they're all on the same page? And it is like kind of an open conspiracy. I mean, any argument, I think the teachers would absolutely lose their mind if you tried to explain that. Any concept that goes against the religious dogma of the brainwashed bullshit teachers, that concept of arguing both sides of an issue, that's not taught in schools anymore, because they look at you with this soylent grin and they go, there are no two sides to these issues. You go, what? Who made you the authoritarians? So I wonder what happens when a social structure is based on a belief system not in accord with reality. Oh, you end up with single moms giving their kids puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgery that sterilizes them and turns them into catamites. So no, Hollywood cannot have a Christian theme for anything, because it's sort of a core destination, where Bolshevism is the journey. They never actually arrive at the perfect society because they keep having to slaughter wrong thinkers and wreckers of progress. It's really insane that they'd even bother to make Narnia. It's part of the humiliation ritual for a conquered people. But I will admit that Hollywood is losing its power. Financially, it's doing fine, because if they get fewer audiences, and they do every year, they just charge more for the tickets and for the streaming stuff. But their influence over people is decreasing every year, because you're listening to stuff like this instead of them. At one time, people used to be more on the same page with exposure to media across forms, because there was less of it. There were much fewer platforms, just as short as 30 years ago, believe it or not, or 40 years ago. People were discussing the same news or shows because everyone was watching the same three main channels. Now things are radically more diffuse. People hold much different belief systems. Like if you look at all these political scales, the different groups are moving further away from each other, the left and the right, and it's not that's an incomplete spectrum, but people are moving apart from each other, because there are kind of a ton of us who just kind of checked out of Hollywood and just stick to alternative social media, which is, it's not exactly fair to say it's further right. It's just not politically correct, where people speak freely. They actually express themselves without having to think like, oh, is this approved wrong think or not? Jordan, who's that guy? Jordan Peterson on Twitter is having meltdowns about anonymous speakers on Twitter. Like, the founding fathers were anonymous when they had to be to write letters and get their ideas out there, because it's dangerous. Look at Jordan Peterson, like, gosh, who's pulling your strings, buddy? Who is pulling your strings? Anyway, people speak freely on alt social media, and that's a good thing. It's nice to actually express yourself. Then in the mainstream, you get people who are saying the approved party line of good think and newspeak. So there's kind of this growing divergence where if the left hears this honest perspective, they absolutely freak out and panic because they're brainwashed to believe they couldn't honestly express themselves. You stop and you get to a point where you go, yeah, but what if you were able to honestly express yourself? What would you say? It's like, who's telling you can't express yourself? Because the platforms control the narrative so strongly, where they teach people to self-censor on the social media platforms, and then they dox and destroy people's lives, get them fired, and go after people. They just dogpile people, and it's like, this is accepted, there's no laws against it. And you think, maybe our politicians should get on that. So they self-censor on social media, and they self-censor in real life. And it's like in Russia or Cuba or China, when you had to speak in dog whistles and codes and stuff, because you just couldn't, it's too dangerous to be have the secret police knock on your door and drag you off to the gulags for there is re-education camp in the schools. Some student correctly gendered their teacher, I guess. I think, used the biologically accurate pronouns. And so the student was taken to, what do they call it? It's like a re-education camp within the school. It's like the South Park Museum of Tolerance. It's like, but what if I have a different belief system? What if you're wrong and we're right? What if this whole pronoun thing is just cultural Bolshevism? Oh, but there are no different belief systems. But what if there were? Anyway, like, comment, subscribe. See you guys on the next episode.